Ready?
We're ready. Yep.
Hello, I am Leslie Seawester, and I serve as chairperson for the Kansas Behavioral Sciences Regulatory Board. I ask the members of the board to respond to a roll call to signify their presence at this open meeting that is being conducted remotely by conference call and other electronic medium. David Anderson.
Present.
Mary Jones.
Here.
Jacqueline Lightcap.
Here.
Bruce Nystrom.
Here.
Andrea Perdomo Morales.
And I do see her on the Zoom call. I think her audio wasn't going to be working today, but she is present.
Okay. I don't see Laura yet. Deb Stidham
Present.
and Carolyn Zasfran.
Present.
I note the following staff members are also present: David Fye,
Here.
Leslie Allen,
Here.
and Cindy Diorcoli.
Present.
Assistant Attorney General Lainey Bernard is also present.
Present.
Next, David Fye will read a message concerning this meeting being held remotely.
This is David Fye, Executive Director for the Behavioral Sciences Regulatory Board. Public comment allows the public to address the board about its concerns, but the Kansas Open Meeting Act, or KOMA, does not require the board to provide public comment or answer questions from individuals. Individuals requesting to provide public comment could contact the Executive Director prior to the meeting by sending an email to david.fye@ks.gov. There will be no public comment at this meeting today to allow for the board sufficient time to discuss the items on the agenda. Because we are conducting this meeting remotely by conference call and other teleconference ability, I state for the record the following information. Access to this meeting is being conducted by a medium of interactive communication that allows members of the public without cost to attend the meeting through the use of the conference call and on the board's YouTube channel. While the meeting is conducted remotely, the requirements of KOMA are not suspended. As such, we'll be conducting this meeting pursuant to KOMA. The board's agenda includes an executive session. If the board elects to go into an executive session, the board will follow this process. First, the board must be in an open meeting before going into an executive session. Then the board must make a motion to recess for an executive session that is seconded by another board member. Each board member will then vote. A majority of the board must vote in favor of the motion to exercise the executive session. The chair will announce the results of the vote. The motion must contain a statement of justification for closure and the subject to be discussed pursuant to KSA 75-4319B and the time and place the open meeting will resume. If a motion for executive session passes, the conference call will be placed on hold. Attendees may stay on the call or return to the conference call number at the expiration of the executive session to attend the remainder of the meeting. The public will be excluded from the executive session portion of the meeting, as the executive session will be conducted by electronic means that is not available to the public. When the board members return to the conference call, the open meeting will resume through the conference call, and the complete motion for an executive session will be recorded in the minutes. I do have a motion for executive session, so if the board would like to go into executive session at a certain point, I will ask, would a board member like to make the following motion, and then I'll read it, and then if a board member wants to go ahead and adopt that motion, they can say so moved. On February 16th, 2022, we sent notice of the board meeting to all individuals who requested notice of the board meetings. The notice was also posted on the board's website, ksbsrb.ks.gov. You may obtain a copy of the notice at that website. An agenda and other meeting materials for this meeting have been posted to the board's website, and you may request a copy of the agenda by sending an email to david.fye@ks.gov with the subject line request for the agenda, and it will be sent to you. The notice contains information for the conference call and YouTube channel that allows the public to attend the meeting free of charge. The notice also states that if there are any technical issues during the meeting, you may send an email to bsrb@ks.gov. A recording of the meeting will be available on the Bsrb YouTube channel following the conclusion of the meeting by using the link to the meeting on the agenda.
The meeting is now called to order, and the board will begin its discussion of the first item on its agenda. Few technical difficulties. Sorry about that. Sorry. So the agenda approval is the first item on our agenda. So has everyone had a chance to look at the agenda?
So moved.
Is there a second?
I'll second.
All in favor, say aye.
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 Anyone opposed, same sign. Okay, we'll move forward with the minutes approval for previous board meetings. If we want to look at January 10th, that was in an email to you. And if approved, just need a motion.
So moved.
Second.
Okay. All in favor, say aye.
Aye. Aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed, same sign. Okay, those are approved. And then the next one was for February 17th.
I move that we approve the minutes for February the 17th.
Second.
I'll second.
Okay. All in favor, say aye.
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 Anyone opposed, same sign. Okay, those passed. And David, you're up already.
Great, thank you. Each full board meeting, I provided an executive director's report summarizing a lot of the work of the agency. Today's going to be a little bit longer than normal, but we have had a really busy time period, so I'll go ahead and highlight some of the work that's been going on here at the office. First, a quick update. Last January, we launched the Bsrb YouTube channel. As of March 1st of 2022, we have uploaded or live streamed 50 meetings of board meetings or advisory committee meetings, and those have been viewed over 1,000 times. It's been about 1,093 times. Secondly, in terms of our operations here at the office, as of January, most agencies were directed to have most of their employees return to primarily working in state office buildings. Recently, about 2 weeks ago, the governor directed that state employees and visitors no longer have to wear masks in state office buildings. However, the other directions were still in place. So we are still under the direction from the governor's office not to have in-person meetings, which is why we're continuing to have a lot of our board meetings and advisory committee meetings remotely. But some of these changes are in the process of being changed. And so we will keep the board updated on those. And when we're able to return to having the option of in-person meetings, we will definitely keep you informed of that option. In terms of some staff updates here, so one of my responsibilities as executive director is to oversee the staff of the BSRB. We last year implemented a monthly staff meeting, which gave me the opportunity to go ahead and provide updates to the staff here about decisions by the board, changes in policy that are involved in pending legislation, speak about other legislative updates relevant to the staff, directions from the governor's office, and then any other items affecting agency operations. One thing that we are implementing this year as kind of a phase 2 approach under the idea of staff development is we are continuing to have these monthly staff meetings, but we are bringing in guest speakers to talk to the staff on different topics that are relevant to them. We feel it's a responsibility to help the staff members grow as they're working for the BSRB. And so in January, we had a speaker come in and talk about workplace ethics. In February, we had a speaker come in and talk about emotional intelligence and better communication skills. And so we're going to continue to do this through the year, have a different speaker come in each month. And so it's kind of a nice way to help our staff members connect with some of these topics and hear from some people that are knowledgeable on these issues. And I think that investment will really pay off as they continue to develop their skills working here with the BSRB. Additionally, the Department of Administration asked that we do a performance review for each staff member each year. And they asked that we follow a process to where we have a beginning of the year meeting where we outline goals. We have a mid-year check-in meeting with them. And then at the end of the year, we review their performance. And so last year, we implemented that and did that for each staff member. This year, they have changed the performance review system from a paper-based system to an online system. So it's got a little bit of a learning curve, but we have made a goal of having those introductory meetings with all staff members in the first quarter of the year. So we're still on pace to do that, but we're going to be wrapping those up here at the end of this month and then continue on with the mid-year check-in and then the end of the year performance review. think it's really important for staff members to have some input on the goals and what our expectations are for them, and also to work with them over the course of the year. So moving now to agency revenues and expenditures. So another part of my responsibilities as executive director is to oversee the budget of the agency. At the beginning of fiscal year 2022, on July 1st of 2022, the beginning balance in the Bsrb fee fund, which is our only fund for the agency, was about $2.1 million. It was about $2,077,000. Monthly revenues do fluctuate greatly, and over the course of this fiscal year, we had a high revenue of about $118,000 in July, the low revenue of about $37,000 in December. However, gross revenue for the fiscal year to date is right about $600,000. By law, 10% of all revenue is contributed back to the state general fund. That's true for all regulatory boards. And so when you look at net revenue after taking that 10% out, our net revenue for the fiscal year is about $535,000. Our expenses for the fiscal year are about $584,000, so it is a little bit higher than the revenue we bring in, but that is partially by design. Just wanted to remind the board, back in 2019, a big change was made to lower all the license fees for individuals seeking licensure. And part of the reason for that decrease was to allow the agency's fee fund balance to decrease slowly over time. So I just want to let you know about how that is going. It is still decreasing, but I think it will be some time before we really need to take a hard look at reevaluating fees and think about increasing fees to get back to a balance, assuming that there are no other big changes. Moving now to another responsibility, and that is working with advisory committees. So there are 7 different advisory committees for the Bsrb, and one of my responsibilities is to work with each of the chairs of the different advisory committees to help them out with planning for their meetings. Most of the advisory committees meet every other month. Some meet quarterly, but I do work with the chairs and help them out either by putting forth a draft agenda and then looking for adjustments, or setting up meetings and then having a conversation about items for those advisory committee meetings. The recent meetings that happened, a lot of them in February, have largely included an annual training for advisory committee members, which is also the annual training for board members. At the January board meeting, I asked for the board members' input on terms of how the training should be done this year. And the consensus of the board was that they would like those to be annual trainings done at the advisory committee meetings. So I went ahead and I took some of the materials that we have that provide guidance for board members, advisory committee members, also some information about public attendees at meetings. And then I used a training that had been put together by our legal staff from the Attorney General's office last year that kind of outlines some other information about the Kansas Open Meeting Act and the Kansas Administrative Procedures Act, and then other items that are relevant for those individuals. And so I think that those have been going really well. One item too, the advisory committee states that advisory committees will consider things that have been referred to them by the board, or will look at different topics referred to them by the chairs of the advisory committees or by the executive director. And so one thing that I decided to go ahead and talk to each of the advisory committees about this year is to review their unique unprofessional conduct regulations, with an idea of, is that language still relevant? Should there be a need to change some of that language? Are there items that are missing? Are there items that are perhaps outdated? And so I've asked each of the advisory committee members at their February meetings to receive a copy of the unprofessional conduct regulations, and then between that meeting and the next meeting for those advisory committees to think about possible edits to those, and then bring those ideas back for discussion at the next advisory committee meetings. Some of the other items that are coming up for the advisory committees, and I know there'll be a report from each of the professions coming up here soon, but one just general topic is that a couple of the professions are going to be looking at reviewing accreditation standards to see if those have changed in the last several years, and with an eye to the Bsrb requirements to make sure that we are still following those accreditation standards, if there have been any changes that are upcoming or changes that may have already happened. Additionally, for the Behavior Analysts Advisory Committee, we have a topic that we'll be asking the advisory committee to look at, and that has to do with the substantially equivalence requirement for licensure, in terms of looking at what we currently would allow, and then providing a little bit more information that could be put into regulations perhaps on that topic. Additionally, we mentioned earlier this year when we were looking at the board governance policy, specifically as it related to advisory committees, that the advisory committee members each serve 2-year terms, and they can serve up to 4 terms. But in the past, I know a lot of those terms had kind of blended together. And so one thing to kind of clean up that process was I created a master list of all the current members of the advisory committees and tracked when their terms started and when their terms would end. And according to that list, there are 16 individuals that are up for reappointment that can continue to serve on the advisory committees. So I went ahead and reached out to each of those individuals, and I'm collecting feedback from them on if they wish to continue to serve, if they wish to continue to be reappointed to the advisory committees. And then I'll go ahead and present that list to the chair of the board and also the chairs of the advisory committees, so they will know which members wish to continue to serve. And if there are members that do not wish to continue to serve, I'll definitely go ahead and let them know that as well. And then next year, the ones that were not up for reappointment this year will be coming up next year. And then this will be a yearly process. Each spring, I will just go ahead and let those individuals know, and then go ahead and refer that information so we can continue to do it as a reappointment on a yearly basis.
Hey, David, I had a question. Did you say that you had roughly 16 people that would be up for reappointment?
Yes, that's right.
Out of those 16, how many did you have an idea of how many were going to possibly be wanting to be reappointed?
So I've heard from, I think, 12 or 13 of the 16, and I think all of them had expressed that they wish to be reappointed. So
just so the board knows, it's not a large number that we would have to be concerned with. I think that was important to note. So,
thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, and one of the reasons I'm starting it, I know the terms generally would start on July 1st, but one of the reasons I started it early was in case there were individuals who wish to no longer serve. This would give the advisory committees a chance to go out and seek individuals and have the opportunity to do that, so they could be in place for the July meeting. But yeah, everyone I've talked to so far has wished to be reappointed. So
I just want to note for the newer board members that David's assistance with the advisory committees, you're flat out spoiling us rotten. I never had this kind of help before, so it's really appreciated. But just letting you guys know that this wasn't how it used to be.
There's many things to talk about that, right? Yeah, for sure. So we appreciate that.
well, thank you. I appreciate that. I'll go ahead and touch upon one topic, and that has to do with the Behavior Analysts Advisory Committee as well. So at the last board meeting, there was a discussion about a recommendation by the Behavior Analysts Advisory Committee to add a member to the board for the behavior analyst profession. Currently in statute, it outlines which individuals will serve on the board, and it talks about having 8 professional members for public, and the 8 professional members are outlined, but there is not a behavior analyst mentioned in those 8 professional members. And one of the questions that was asked at the last board meeting was how many of those behavior analysts hold another license under the Bsrb. And so I had Ashley go ahead and run those numbers for me. There are, if you combine the behavior analyst and the assistant behavior analyst, there are about 305 or a little over. When you're looking at individuals who are in that category who hold another license, the number is 8. So there are a few, but it's a small number. One item that I've been trying to research in terms of knowing the logistics for potentially adding a member to the board is right now there is a ratio of about 2 to 1 in terms of professional members to public members. And as I understand it, the last time that a board member was added, it was for the addiction counseling profession. And at that time, there was not a public member added. And so one of the thoughts that I had was, if this 2 to 1 ratio is something that may be not specific to the Bsrb, but maybe specific to agencies in general, if that is something we have to consider, then there would be something more to the equation of, would there have to be 2 board members added, potentially 1 representing the profession and 1 representing the public. So I asked an individual from Legislative Research Department to look into that to see if there are statutes on that topic. It is a very busy time for that office. They're right in the middle of legislative session. So I did put that request in, but I know that they are busy with a lot of other things. And so I don't expect to hear back from them on that until probably sometime in the future, hopefully by the next board meeting, but they are looking into that topic. But I think that is relevant for the board's consideration when they're considering that recommendation. So another item I wanted to make you aware of under the umbrella of the advisory committees is back around 2015 or 16, the Social Work Advisory Committee requested a survey of all social workers on topics that related to the professions. And the BSRB at the time went ahead and put out that survey and collected information and drafted a report. And the Social Work Advisory Committee had requested that the BSRB put out a similar survey of social workers, but looking at topics like supervision and some other topics. And so that is one thing that I worked on with the advisory committee in the fall. And a survey was put out in December, and we collected information from social workers. An email was sent out to all licensed social workers to go ahead and submit feedback if they were interested in responding to that survey. And so based on that feedback that was collected, we went ahead and put together a report. And I won't spend a lot of time on this, just a second, but I will go ahead and share my screen here. You should be able to see a report that has been drafted by the BSRB. It is a 25-page report, but it's not that much in writing. There's a page that explains the process we use to go about doing that survey and collecting information and summarizing it. We did have over 1,000 social workers respond to the survey. There was 1,087 who responded to it. We kept it short to try to get as many people as possible responding to the survey. We tried to ask a couple of questions in terms of where the individuals were licensed and what areas they practiced in to make sure that we had good representation. We asked about if they work in a predominantly urban area, rural area, or frontier area. And while those didn't match one-to-one with the last census, they were pretty close. And so we think we have a good representative sample. I'll go ahead and just highlight a couple things on here. We did ask about clinical supervision, and we asked some questions for individuals who do provide supervision in Kansas. We also asked for the individuals that did provide supervision, what sort of training they had before they began to practice. We also went ahead and asked individuals if they held an LSCSW license when they received clinical supervision, did they encounter any issues relating to the quality of the supervision? And so we collected some of that information, and the report lists the individual responses. So you can, if you would like to peruse those, feel free to review that information. We asked a general question: should LSCSWs providing clinical supervision be board-approved supervisors? And there were responses here that ranged from yes, no to unsure. And then we asked some questions about if we had board-approved supervisors for social work, how many continuing education hours should be required up front as one-time training, and how many could be in each renewal period. And then we asked a question on one of the topics a lot of the advisory committees were discussing. Should social workers be required to take 3 hours of continuing education in the areas of diversity, equity, and inclusion every 2 years as part of the renewal period, if those hours could count within the 40 hours required for each license renewal period? So we did collect some information on that as well. So I don't want to spend a lot of time on that report, but I just want to let you know that report is out there. It is posted to the BSRB website. It is under the materials from the, I believe, the last Social Work Advisory Committee. But if you have any questions about that report, I believe the advisory committee is planning to look more into the responses that were received from that report. But I just wanted to make you all aware that that report was done, and it is posted in case anybody has questions on the information from that report. Under the next topic, so last year we spent a little bit of time looking at the board governance policy. And the board asked me to go ahead and take a look at the policy and basically write up a report on suggested or recommended changes. And so I went ahead and I did that and brought it back for the board consideration. That board governance policy had not been updated since about 2011, so it had been some time, and there were several changes the board recommended to that. That board governance policy is now split into two different documents: an expectations for board members document and also an advisory committee policy, and those are posted to the website. And I think that they are much more aligned to the practices of the board currently and provide some updated information for individuals. Along the lines of cleaning up policy information for the BSRB, there is a document on the BSRB website which deals with the investigation policy for the agency. I believe this document was last updated back in 2009. So it similarly does need to be reviewed and updated. And one thing that I'm planning to do is to go ahead and review that document similar to what I did with the board governance policy, and then go ahead and have more conversations with our investigators and legal staff, and then bring back suggested or recommended changes to that investigation policy. But I wanted to highlight it at this meeting. I'm hoping to bring that back for the next board meeting in a couple months. And so I would recommend that board members also go ahead and review that document too, just to be knowledgeable about the information that is in there. And also, if you have other recommended changes, that is certainly something the board could consider when they review the report that I'm planning to put together for your consideration. One item also in that document is it does talk about that terms on the Complaint Review Committee are 2 years in length. And you can definitely serve more than 2 years, but based on the language in the document, it does indicate that terms on the Complaint Review Committee, or the CRC, are 2 years. And so individuals who have been on the committee for at least 2 years are due for reappointment. And I believe there were 3 members that were appointed 2 years ago. And Carolyn serves on the CRC. And Carolyn's second board term ends in June of this year. So I think there will be some considerations in terms of appointing members or reappointing members to the Complaint Review Committee. But I did want to make you aware of that 2 year. And so I'll go ahead and be reaching out to the members of the CRC to see if board members are interested in being reappointed to the CRC. So it's just something to think about from now into the next board meeting. But I'll be planning to reach out to you and have conversations with the members of the CRC. In terms of some updates on licensing, I did want to let you know last year, as a way to review some of the applications for individuals who did not receive their education from accredited schools, or at least from the national accrediting body, those applications are more difficult for the agency to review to verify that the programs and the coursework meet the requirements for licensure in Kansas. And so last year, we went ahead and started the process of using an expert review process, and we designed a contract with the assistance of legal counsel, and we've had contract negotiations with several individuals. Currently, right now, we are contracting with 4 individuals for those review of licensure applications. That is Andrew Secor, Kendall Carswell, Jardine Coleman, and Mike James. And we're really appreciative of those individuals who are assisting the board with their work. I want to let you know, based on the number of applications that we received, we really could use more individuals. A lot of the individuals who are assisting us have other full-time jobs. And so based on the number of applications we have, we could really appreciate if other individuals are interested in serving. So we are reaching out to other people. If you do have individuals, especially in the professional counseling area or the addiction counseling area, that you believe would make good individuals to assist the work of the board as experts in that area, go ahead and reach out to me, and I'd be happy to talk to any individuals who could potentially serve in that capacity. We'd really like to grow this pool so that we don't put a lot of pressure on the individuals to try to ask them to work too quickly, but also we don't want there to be delays with the individuals who are currently waiting on the materials to be reviewed. So we're kind of making you aware of this. It's a thing we're working on, but we could really use your assistance if you do know of more people who you could refer to us to have conversations. Additionally, also under the area of licensing, I wanted to make you aware, recently we've been having some delays with score reporting from NADAC in terms of some of the additional addiction counselors who are seeking licensure. This is not something that we have had control over. It is something that they were doing some internal transitions and some adjustments, and it led to some delays with individuals taking the examinations, but the company did not report the scores to us. And so we are working with representatives from the company. We believe that a lot of those issues have been resolved, but if you hear any concerns from individuals about scores not being reported or not being reported quickly, we are aware of those things, and we believe that by working with NADAC, we believe we are on better footing in terms of those scores being reported to us, because our hands are a little tied in this situation. If we don't have the official score report, we can't move forward with licensure, but we believe we've worked on that. And so I think it's something that we've been able to resolve, or at least we're in the process of having it nearly resolved. But I wanted to update you on that in case you were knowledgeable about any of those types of situations. A couple of unique things I wanted to make you aware of too. So one item that's kind of an interesting thing is, so there was a Spark task force that had to do with a lot of the federal funding, and it had to do with the pandemic. And there was recently a Spark task force that had opened up a funding opportunity for entities to apply for funds, more or less as grant type funds. And there were several different categories by which individuals could apply for these funds. One of the areas was modernization. And the Bsrb does have a goal to convert our paper records to electronic records. We're hoping to work on that sometime as a 3-year type plan. But we don't have any available funding for that. We were just hoping to move forward on it within existing resources. However, when I noticed they opened it up for modernization applications, I thought it might be helpful for us to at least put in a request and then see what happens. And so on behalf of the agency, I did go ahead and submit a proposal. I went ahead and had several conversations beforehand, talked to other agencies about what they did to convert their paper records to electronic. I went ahead and talked to a couple of vendors just to get an idea of what would be a reasonable price range. And so I went ahead and essentially submitted what is similar to a grant proposal through that Spark task force, asking for or requesting available funding if it is available for this type of modernization project. And so I will let you know, I haven't heard back from the Spark task force yet, but I believe they were not reviewing any of those until they had all been collected. And they were all due to be submitted last month. So ours was submitted within the deadline. And so I will let you know if we receive any funding through that. Additionally, in the past, for receival of board member information, there is certain information that is public information, and then at times there are confidential meetings, for example, review of certain licensure applicants through a CAPA proceeding, and there are other situations too, like maybe for the complaint review committee, where it's helpful to receive information more confidentially. I want to let you know we've had lots of conversations behind the scenes on an alternative process to be able to transfer that information to board members more securely. We do have a replacement in place. We are working with the Office of Information Technology about that. Given the nature of the security of this information, I'm not going to talk in detail about it today, but I wanted to give you all a heads up. I'll be reaching out to you individually to let you know how you can proceed with that confidential way of receiving that secure information. But I'll be reaching out to you probably sometime in the next week and connecting you with the Office of Information Technology Services. So you'll be able to access that information more securely. And then another item I want to make you aware of as an update from the last board meeting. So we have been working on a frequently asked questions style document, and I've had some conversations with staff members. We are trying to be a bit more proactive when individuals apply for licensure. Sometimes individuals will apply and then they have to follow up with more information in the area of discipline or potentially in education. There's also been some confusion at times a little bit with our payment system that we launched back in the fall. So we're trying to design a general message to applicants that we can try to resolve a number of those issues up front. And so we are working on that, and we should have it available to you at the next board meeting for something for you can review. And we're hoping that when individuals apply for licensure, we can direct them to this document, and it'll answer a lot of their questions, or we can avoid a lot of the issues that we have seen at times, or speed up the process for individuals at least. Moving next to another topic, that is legislative updates. So I mentioned last time we had a full board meeting that each year the budget for the BSRB must be approved by both the House and the Senate. Those involve separate budget hearings by House committees and Senate committees, and then those have to be reported out favorably by those chairs in the full appropriations committees. Our budget has been approved for this fiscal year 2022, and also for next year, fiscal year 2023. Those appropriations bills still do need to be run by the House and Senate. It's my understanding that they most likely will be running those bills on the floor sometime this week. They might make other further adjustments at the end of the session at omnibus, but it is possible we could have the baseline budget all wrapped up before they leave for that. In terms of the Bsrb bill, Senate Bill 387 was requested by the Bsrb. It included 3 recommendations by the board. That bill was heard in the Senate Public Health and Welfare Committee. That committee did ask a number of questions at the bill hearing. They did take action to amend the bill, and they removed one of the recommendations that dealt with a continuing education requirement for licensed psychology in the area of diversity, equity, and inclusion. So the committee voted to amend the bill to take that out of the bill, and then the amended bill was voted favorably for passage. We were hopeful that the bill would be worked on the Senate floor prior to a date called turnaround, where bills that advance from committee are supposed to be worked on the chamber floor. But unfortunately, their bill was not worked. And so Senate Bill 387 is essentially dead. And under most circumstances, that would mean that we would probably be out of luck, and we would have to approach the legislature next session to try to get those items across the floor. But I went ahead and had a number of conversations and worked with some individuals, and was able to have the 2 items that passed favorably out of the Senate committee introduced in House Appropriations as a brand new bill. That is House Bill 2734. And we were able to expedite that for hearing, and that is scheduled to be heard today at 1:30 in the House Health and Human Services Committee. So after the board meeting, I'll be going over to the Capitol and testifying in favor of our bill. And I've been contacted by other individuals who have indicated they're also planning to be there to provide proponent testimony. So I think it's important that the version that moved out of the Senate Public Health and Welfare Committee can at least continue to move forward. And so that's our goal right now, is to try to get at least that passed for this session, and then go ahead and consider other items for future years in terms of legislative activity. In terms of other bills,
Dave.
yes.
A quick question about that.
Sure.
What was the rationale for removing the piece on the required training on inclusion?
Yeah, so in the Senate committee, they had a number of questions about the bill. When we were up for hearing in the Senate Public Health and Welfare Committee, we were the only bill scheduled for hearing that day. 3 other individuals submitted written only testimony, but I was the one proponent speaking in favor of our bill. And they asked me a number of questions. And some of the questions that the legislative committee members asked had to do with adding requirements for individuals to be licensed in Kansas. Some of them had to do with the origins of the topic of diversity, equity, and inclusion, and some criticisms of some of the potential thought processes behind that topic. There were also some committee members that spoke about perhaps other topics might be a good requirement in place of this, for example, training in suicide prevention. And so there were a number of questions, but the overall position of that committee was to go ahead and remove that topic. The other 2 topics, they asked a few technical questions about, but they were largely in support of those. And so with that item removed from the bill and passing out favorably, my hope was we could just take that as if it had been passed across the Senate floor and keep it moving on the House side as it had been amended, so that we could get those items through this session and move forward. And then in future years, we could consider other topics. But I think in terms of, the goal of getting things past the legislature this year, I think it was the best opportunity we had to go ahead and keep things moving. I think for any individuals who have not viewed that committee meeting, I think it's a really helpful thing. all of the legislative hearings are broadcast on the YouTube channel for the legislature. And I think that one in particular was really good. There was also an article in the Capitol Journal that summarized a lot of the conversation on the topic back and forth. And I think it provided a lot of helpful information just based on some of the questions that were asked. It kind of revealed maybe some of the positions by committee members. And so hopefully that's a little more information on that topic.
One more, just follow up. Was the written testimony provided in support or not?
Yes. Yeah, the written testimony was in support. It was mostly by individuals from the Kansas Psychological Association, and they were supportive of the bill itself, but specifically the item concerning the diversity, equity, and inclusion.
Thank you.
Sure. So as I mentioned, yeah, House Bill 2734, which includes the two recommendations that passed out of the Senate committee, that is up for hearing today in the House committee at 1:30 today. So I'll be leaving the board meeting today to go over there and provide testimony. I appreciate the board holding the last board meeting on February 17th. That was not a regularly scheduled board meeting, but there were a number of bills that were introduced, and I wanted to provide the board the opportunity to give me direction to provide testimony on those topics. And I just want to give you a quick summary. Sub for Senate Bill 34 was one of the bills we talked about at that board meeting that had to do with the original version of the bill would have put a sunset on all regulations for the BSRB, and it would have required anything that needed to continue to be in place to be put in statute. So it was a very significant bill, and that bill received a hearing last January, but had not received any movement. And then in February of this year, the committee picked it up, made it a substitute, and voted it out of committee. They changed it a lot when they made it a substitute. They added a reporting requirement for all state agencies to review all of their regulations and submit a report each, basically on a schedule of 5 years, with different state agencies having to do that report each year. And you'd have to justify if each of your regulations was necessary for the implementation of state law. And if it was not, you would have to go through the process of having that regulation revoked. The sunset part was taken out of it, but the bill adding that requirement for the reporting was up for a hearing in the House Fed and State Committee just recently on March 9th. And I went ahead and I testified in front of that committee. I put forward testimony as a neutral individual. However, I noted that the BSRB is aware that good regulations are important. And I noted the work of the board in terms of reviewing the regulations and offering changes. I also noted that we're a small agency. And so in terms of this comprehensive reporting requirement, it would basically cause us to have to utilize staff time differently and basically move away from the public protection mission of the agency by taking time away that could go towards helping individuals get licensed or towards investigations and complaints for doing this massive comprehensive report. And so I asked for us to be exempted from the bill. And so we were neutral on the bill itself because we were supportive of the idea that there be good regulations, but specifically as it related to us, we already have a process in place where we're going about moving, and for the other items we noted. So the chair of the committee did note that he is likely to consider amendments, and then he tends to work the bill at some point in the future, but we don't have a date for when that bill will be worked. The other bill was Senate Bill 497, and that was an anti-human trafficking bill. That bill was heard, but that bill has not advanced any further since the last time that we talked. Additionally, there was House Bill 2672. It was known as the Open Borders for Kansas Job Act. That would have made significant changes to the social work profession, and that bill has not moved forward any further than last time we spoke. And additionally, the House Bill 2552, which focused on telemedicine and established the Telehealth Advisory Committee. No hearings have been scheduled for that bill either. Some updates on other topics. Back on January 1st of 2022, Kansas became a member of the Multi-State Interjurisdictional Compact for Licensed Psychologists, known as SIPAC. And since that date, individuals have been able to apply to the SIPAC Commission if they are licensed as a licensed psychologist in Kansas and they meet other requirements. There are two things you can apply for if you meet the requirements under SIPAC. You can apply to provide telehealth services in other compact states, or you can provide a limited amount of in-person services in other compact states. As of March 1st, 2022, there are 26 individuals with a home state license in Kansas that are now part of that compact to provide telehealth services in other states. There are 3 individuals who hold a home state license in Kansas who are providing in-person services in other states. On the Bsrb website, there's more information on SIPAC, and there's also a search tool. So if you want to look up another psychologist in a different state to see if they are part of the compact, you can do that to see if someone is practicing in Kansas and you want to see if they are part of the compact. Last year, there was a bill that passed that created the Kansas Fights Addiction Grant Review Board. That was also going to create a grant review fund, and it had to do with receiving some of the money through federal legislation involved with opioids and other drug lawsuits. That board is still in the organizational status. The Attorney General's office is the one in charge of it, and I basically have been contacting them every couple of months asking for updates, but they are still waiting on individuals to be appointed. So there's nothing new to report on that, but I'll continue to monitor it. There was also a bill last year that would have created an overdose fatality review board that would study fatalities that related to overdoses and opioids. It was organized by KDHE. The bill did not pass, but KDHE did receive a grant funding from the CDC. So they went ahead and started having a group meet. Bruce and I attended a couple of their meetings, but they were largely organizational and discussed the topics they wanted to look at, but they wanted more legislative involvement. And so at the time, they were interested in offering legislation for the 2022 legislative session. I have been looking for that, and I don't believe that those bills have moved forward, but I will continue to keep the board updated on the Overdose Fatality Review Board if that group continues to meet sometime this year. One item for board members I wanted to let you all know is that there is a training opportunity for new board members through ASWB, the Association of Social Work Boards. It's a virtual training and will take place on June 2nd and June 3rd. And then just to let you know a little bit of the work of the BSRB here, I went ahead and listed advisory committees since the last board meeting and some of the other meetings that our agency has facilitated since the last full board meeting. After that, I wanted to highlight a few of the presentations that we had given to groups of students. Leslie Allen and myself routinely talk to different groups of students from different schools on licensing topics and also disciplinary information to help give them information up front. One unique opportunity I was invited to was there was a group of students from the K-State Salina Social Work program, and they were hosting an Art of Policies conference. And they asked me to be one of several guest speakers to speak on the importance of having good policies. So I spoke with them and just talked to them a little bit about the policies that we have here at the BSRB and what goes into our creation of policies practice. And it was had a good set of information that we provided to them, and they had some good questions for us too. Next, I provided a list of some of the legislative meetings, some of the times that we've been over to the Capitol to talk on different items. And then in terms of the other meetings attended, I just wanted to highlight a few of those. So back in the end of January, last full board meeting in January, I talked to the board about having been invited to attend the Federation of Associations of Regulatory Boards, the FARB conference in Fort Worth, Texas. And they had asked me to come and be a guest speaker on the topic of public protection through creative access to information. So I did go ahead and attend that conference. And I think the presentation that I provided was well received. I had several individuals ask me about the work that the board is doing, and we're excited about some of the things that we are doing here. And so that was really good to hear. Some of the topics that I was exposed to, which I think is also really helpful for me, is hearing what states are doing to expedite military member and military spouse licensure, continuation of pandemic policies. There was some information on leadership methods. There was some information on the diversity, equity, and inclusion as part of the regulation process. They spoke about some different things that agencies are doing with websites to assist the work of regulatory agencies, the future of regulatory boards, and then information on board member appointments and public member perspectives. So there was a lot of good information they covered, and I tried to take some notes and bring back some information that perhaps we can look at in the future. On February 4th and February 18th, there was a 2-day conference for the American Association of State Counseling Boards, AASCB. They looked at some really interesting topics. There is currently a multi-state compact for professional counselors that is being considered. It has not had a great deal of traction yet. We've had, I think, 2 states joined at the end of, by the end of 2021, and they were more optimistic that additional states would join in 2022. But last I have heard, the uptake has been slow on that in terms of the movement for that professional counseling compact. The advisory committee has discussed that last year, and we're still continuing to monitor that. And then on February 8th, I attended an Association of State and Provincial Psychology Boards, ASPPB, Board Administrators and Registrars Committee winter meeting. And at that meeting, there was some discussion by a lot of different agencies. They noted that licensure processing times have experienced delays. A lot of applicants are not supplying all documentation that is necessary when they submit their information for licensure. And states are also looking at possible factors to consider when handling disciplinary actions. So just for a couple of upcoming meetings that I'll be attending, there is an ASPPB mid-year meeting that's coming up at the end of April. So I'll be going to that. And then also the ASWB is offering an education meeting for regulators. That is not one that is covered by ASWB. However, they did open it up for individuals to request scholarships to attend that meeting. And I had never attended that meeting before. It was, I don't know if it was even available last year, but I went ahead and submit a request for a scholarship, and I was approved for that. So I won a scholarship to attend that conference. So I'll be using that to attend that conference there at the end of April. So I realized that was lengthy and I covered a lot of material, but I'll go ahead and stop now and see if there's any questions from members of the board.
I'm impressed. That's a very long list, David. You continue to impress me and others. You're so organized and in so many areas, and thank you for your service.
Well, thank you, Carolyn. I appreciate that.
Okay, if there's no questions for David, then thank you, David. We'll move on to, looks like staff reports. So is there any staff reports?
I do not have any reports today.
Okay.
And under that, I do want to mention just one thing. In your copy of materials for the meeting, we do have an updated handout that has the number of licenses. So you can see the new monthly report for the total number of licenses by profession, and also the breakout by different levels of licensure.
Sorry about that.
Right, we see that, so that's good. And then we have complaint review committee report. That kind of ties into that as well.
For this, I'll yield to Cindy, let her share her expertise.
All right.
And Cindy, it looks like you're muted right
You're
now.
muted.
Okay, I apologize for that. You have the RAV or the complaint statistics, and then you also have the cases that go before the complaint review committee, which I usually say are self-explanatory, but you're always free to ask questions. Every month we do the RAV statistics, which are the number of complaints or RAVs that come in. I just wanted to go over one statistic, draw your attention to one statistics that we have. And so in February 22, it says the number of open cases. And so that says 81, which has been fairly consistent this year. If you look at them, we have, it kind of averages out from month to month that we have approximately 81. It actually, it averages for this year about 82 open cases. And last year it was 108. that we tended to have over, and it's been dropping down. And which one of the goals that we've had is to try to be a little more efficient. It has to do with a lot of internal and external measures, but I just want to draw your attention to that statistic that we have been trying to and have been successful about decreasing the number of open cases that we have.
And can I just brag on this board for a minute as well? I've seen such a change in over time being on the board, and this board is really good about being consistent and being just and also being fair. So, hats off to you all as well on that. I think that has a lot to do with it. And no disrespect to the CRC, I know that it has a lot to do with you all and how you conduct business as well. But I just think that the board overall needs a little bit of a pat on the back as well, so to speak. So are there any questions about Cindy's report, or do you have anything for Cindy? Is there anything else, Cindy, that you wanted to add to that? Sorry, I didn't mean to break.
Oh, no, that's what I just,
presentation.
anyone at any time, if they have any questions, feel free to contact me about a statistic, or also any questions about anything. I'm always free. The easiest, call me, or you can also email me. I'm always available.
We appreciate that. All right, so next is professions reports, and we start with licensed psychology. I think, do we have a report for licensed psychology?
Yeah, I can go ahead and speak to that. Licensed Psychology Advisory Committee did meet in February. One of the major topics that was covered by the advisory committee involved the training. They did receive the full training for members, and so they do have a number of new members on that advisory committee. So did educate them a little bit on some of the responsibilities of board members, and then has some of those carry over to advisory committee members. So they are planning to meet again in April.
Thank you. Carolyn, if you want to do social work report. You're muted.
Whoops. We met February the 15th, Tuesday at 1 o'clock. And we were able to introduce our new advisory committee members, which was really nice. 4 of the new members. And under new business, David provided the training that he referred to earlier. That went really well. We also were able to review the social work survey that David spoke to. And we discussed committee work for the upcoming year. And for homework, we've asked members to take a look at the unprofessional conduct regulations to see if they felt it needed to be edited or changed. And so our next meeting is April the 19th, Tuesday at 1 o'clock. I think the meeting went real well.
Thank you, Carolyn. Doesn't look like Laura's here. Is there a report for professional counseling?
I can speak to that one as well. That committee also did meet in February. The majority of the meeting was taken by the training, and that advisory committee was asked, similar to the others, to go ahead and research and review the unprofessional regulations and to bring back any changes to the unprofessional conduct regulations at the next meeting, which will be in April.
Thank you. Master level psychology.
Yeah, we met on February 10th, and the other advisory committee. A lot of our time was spent with the board and advisory committee training that they did. We discussed what we wanted to get done during the next year. We continued a conversation in regard to educational requirements, particularly the in-residence piece. And we will meet next April 20th.
Thank you, David. Mary, Marriage and Family Therapy Committee.
Yes, thank you. We met February 11th. We spent quite a bit of time talking about language changes to regulations that were confusing around our approved supervision designation. So we've had proposed language suggested around that and continuing education. Also addressed the in-residence requirements for accredited programs. We spent so much time on that. We did not get to our board or advisory committee training. So that is on our next meeting agenda item. And then we also spent some time on the necessary recruiting of new advisory committee members. So we agreed that David would send out a call for those interested. So that'll be our work over the next few months. We have 2 committee members whose terms will expire. We want to make sure to get enough capacity in that committee. We'll meet again April 8th, I believe.
Mary. Deb with Addiction Counseling.
Yeah, addiction counseling did not meet since our last board meeting. We meet this Friday, March 18th.
Thank you. And then Bruce, Behavioral Analysis.
Our committee met on February 9th. I have to admit that I attended the licensed psychologist committee meeting 2 days before that and received the training for board and committee members. Then I received the same training again on the 9th. So I have no excuse not to know that stuff. At least, anyway, it's different. We had several new members on the Behavioral Analyst Advisory Committee. So we introduced, they all kind of know each other anyway. So it's a small community, but we formally welcome them to the Advisory Committee. We discussed getting an actual behavior analyst appointed as a board member, Bsrb board member. And I think most of them were saying, well, that'd be easy. We'll just pick a name and do it. And our executive director informed us that it's a far more complicated process than that. He gave you some insight into it. You know, we might actually have to end up appointing a public member too. So that got tabled, and we'll deal with that on a later basis. We standards for becoming a certified or licensed behavior analyst, and apparently there's some different standards out there. I think that's going to be, that started a conversation that will be continuing for some time into our next meetings. So we will meet again in April.
All right, thank you, Bruce. So if you all noticed in the agenda, we added a 10-minute break. I'm glad that you approved that because I was requesting that. I almost thought about adding a lunch, but we're going to talk about that later. So we are going to take a 10-minute break. So it looks like we'll be back here in about by 11:20, something like that. So give us a little extra time. So David will get us back on the call, or do we just turn off our cameras and mute? Is that okay?
Yeah, I'll go ahead and just put people back in the waiting room, and then I'll let everybody back in about 11:20. So either way is good. Yeah.
Thank you all. Everyone looks refreshed. Okay, ready to get back to business? So the old business discussion on types of licenses needed for pre-approved continuing education providers.
Okay, and I'll start that topic. You want me to go ahead and start that?
Yeah, I'm sorry. I thought someone else maybe had brought that to us, but go ahead.
Sure. And that's a continuation of a topic that was discussed at the last meeting. So right now, the BSRB is able to provide or to pre-approve certain providers for continuing education. Right now, to be a pre-approved provider, there has to be a connection to a social worker licensed by the BSRB. And so there was a discussion at the last board meeting about whether that could be opened up, whereas other individuals could serve in that capacity instead of it being limited to the social work profession. And so there was general support by members of the board to open that up to allow other individuals to serve in that capacity. So they asked us to go ahead and draft some language, how that would look, and bring it back to the board for review. So I think with that, I'll go ahead and I'll turn it over to Leslie Allen. She's in your packet. You'll see a copy of KAR 102-2-4B, and there's certain language in there that is highlighted and some other language that's underlined. And I'll go ahead and I'll turn it over to her so she can talk a little bit more about some of the work she did on those regulations.
First, I wanted to clarify that making this change would still only approve social work continuing education. The change is to allow the person who's developing the program to be one of our other licensees, but it would still be for social work CEUs. So on the first page down on number 3, I changed it. It did say that the person has to at least have the educational degree to qualify for licensure as a social worker in order to be the person in the program that develops the continuing education. So I changed it and said that they have to meet the educational requirements or hold licensure as, and I listed all the professions, including behavior analysts. Oh, there you go. It was flashing and it was so I've listed all the professions that might be part of that. And I think that's what David Anderson, is that what you were looking for?
Yes.
Okay. You guys
So
have,
Leslie, I have a question. You said it's only for social work CEUs. However, this allows other professions to be approved by the board as a supervisor or an educator of the CEUs, correct?
correct.
Shouldn't use supervisor. That was a bad term for that. But as
Yeah.
someone approved to provide the CEU, it doesn't have to be a social worker. It can be in all those other professions.
Right.
However, it only applies to social work CEUs.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Is it difficult to have that for each profession?
It would have to be put into their regulations. None of them have that right now.
It seems like every profession would want the opportunity to be a single, BSW provider. I mean,
Well, and I think
if it works this way, that's fine, but
I look at it from both. Thanks, Carolyn, for saying that, because, being able to have different professions as on your committee as a provider is important, because we know you don't always have a social work licensee available. And also, I think it would cut down on the confusion, questions all the time around does this qualify to the BSRB as an MFT continuing education credit? And so I would really like to, first of all, say thank you for doing this, and I'm in support of that. And secondly, I would like to move forward that we get some regulation change in the other disciplines, at least in the MFT discipline.
That will show, again, the commonalities that we have as professions.
Mhm.
I would agree that it is very confusing. There's always concern when we're putting out some sort of offering and, well, is this going to be pre-approved? And I guess I don't know, except for the just marketing aspect, why it's even needed. I don't even know why it's needed for social work to have it, but I'm sure there's some history to that. So I am definitely in favor of all or nothing. So we either all do this or none of us do it, but I'm getting cranky the longer I serve. So sorry about that.
We, as staff, it's actually, the social work one is helpful because we say, well, it doesn't automatically say your profession, but we can tell you that it's been approved by the board for continuing education. So there shouldn't be any problem with it. People
Yeah, it's
really
just that
want
the
a guarantee.
number of offerings just doesn't equate to the number of CEUs we have to have. So you still have to take the chance, right? If you're audited, that maybe it won't. I mean, again,
Right.
I don't know how often that happens. To me, most of it's kind of a slam dunk, but I don't know.
Yeah, most professions really apply to many. I just gave one yesterday on compassion, fatigue, and burnout, and I'm sure that anyone could join that,
Right.
for that. But
The biggest profession, the biggest first time audits that has troubles are usually BSWs, because not everything they do is, social work continuing. A lot of it's job specific. And so they kind of struggle with that. I mean, they get through it. And
I go to a lot of workshops that are led by a physician, a nurse practitioner, an attorney. Is there any thought as to why those aren't included in this long list of professions?
no, I just,
I mean, each time I have numerous hours, especially with physicians and attorneys, as a presenter, as a person who provided the CE.
Do you think that those groups, Bruce, would apply to the BSRB to be a provider?
Probably not. I mean, they would just see that as unnecessary bureaucracy or whatever. I don't know. But, maybe if they work for an agency, they could get someone else to apply for them. But
sometimes we have some from Washburn, some attorneys.
Well, and sometimes for CLEs, for attorneys, they just have to have an attorney that's related to the project or the presentation applying for the CLE.
Mhm.
So that could be, there's, a doctor providing the training, but there's also a master level psychologist involved applying for the CEU or whatever they would call theirs.
Right.
So that might be a way around it, Bruce. I'm not sure if that makes sense, but that could be a way to get that completed.
a little bit of a change in subject. When I was president of Division 31 with APA, we tried to get the APA Continuing Education Committee to appoint people outside of educational settings, educational institutions, to be on the list of approved APA providers. And they were coming up with new standards that would basically limit it. The only people who could be an approved APA provider would be someone, a faculty member or some type of educational person that, and they pretty much specifically outlawed, or that's not the right word, but we're not interested in any providers being on their CE committee. I think that's still going forward. It doesn't have a lot of traction, but it hasn't died. And I don't know if we'll end up seeing some of that here at our level or not, but hopefully that's not the emerging trend.
I know that when I search for CEUs, I make sure that it's approved by either the board or our national organization, because sometimes, you know, they're not approved.
Yeah, and what they're talking about now is not just, you know, giving a blanket approval to an agency to provide CE, but for a specific workshop, you would have to provide, you know, an outline, you know, what you intend to do, cite references, all this, you know, a real academic exercise, which, yeah, I mean, I can see where that would clean up a lot of the stupid workshops I've gone to over the years that I felt like I shouldn't have to pay for that. But I think it may be too selective also. Anyway, I don't want to, you know, divert the conversation away from our item here. I just wanted to throw that in.
I appreciate your input. That's good information, Bruce.
I would like to go ahead and make a motion that we approve this language as proposed.
Thank you. Do we have a second?
I'll second.
Well, and I
Thank
think
David.
probably
Go ahead, Dave.
Oh, sorry. Before you guys vote, I just wanted to make sure that everybody's on the same page, that this current vote would be about approving this language specific to the structure that's currently in place in the regulations. So it would just be for those providers, and social work is the only profession that allows pre-approved continuing education courses, but it would allow the other level practitioners to be in place, not just having a social worker connected to it. Okay.
Okay. We have a second, David Anderson, I believe. So all in favor, say aye.
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 Any opposed, same sign. So that's passed. And so I think moving forward, the advisory committees could bring that up within their committees and work on those changes in their own professions. Okay, that takes care of old business. We are moving now to executive session for the format for our executive director annual evaluation. So I think Dave has a motion.
I do. I have draft language here for an executive session motion. So I can go ahead and read that and then see if a member of the board would like to make that motion. So would a member of the board like to make the following motion? Pursuant to KSA 75-4319, would the board member move that the board recess into executive session? And sorry, I should clarify this first. We need to know how long the executive session will last, and then we'll have a time on here when the board will return to the meeting.
Yeah, everyone, I think we're going to need at least, I'd say 20 minutes at least. So if we could have 20 minutes.
Okay. Then to give a little bit of time for the switchover, how about if I put it at 20 minutes and then to come back at noon?
Yep.
I think by the time the motion is made and everything is taking place, it'll probably be closer to about 11:40. So
That would be great.
Minutes. Okay.
Thank you.
Would a board member like to make the following motion? Pursuant to KSA 75-4319, the board would move into recess into executive session for 20 minutes and reconvene the open meeting at noon. The meeting will be reconvened remotely by conference call at 1-877-278-8686, PIN number 327072, and by Zoom as directed in the notice of meeting that was sent to individuals who requested notice and is published on the board's website at ksbsrb.ks.gov. The justification for closure is to discuss personnel matters of non-elected personnel. The board's legal counsel, Assistant Attorney General Lainey Barnard, is included in the executive session. The subject to be discussed in the executive session is personnel evaluations. So would a board member like to make that motion?
So moved.
Is there a second?
I'll second.
Thank you. All in favor, please say aye.
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 And any opposed, same sign. Okay, so we will move into executive session using the conference call number provided.
Okay, and just for the boards, just make sure you all are aware, you did receive information for the executive session in a separate email that included the confidential phone number to call. Leslie Allen is going to go ahead and open the meeting up so that it can begin. So she'll log in, and then once you all are present, before you begin your discussion, she'll exit the call so you can go ahead and continue. So.
waiting on a couple people, looks like.
Yes, I believe we're waiting. So I got an email from Andrea. She's not going to be able to rejoin us, but I believe Carolyn still needs to log back in. And I am admitting Carolyn in from the waiting room right now. So that gives us 7 board members. So we do have quorum.
Thank you. So there, a brief motion, if no one else wants to provide that, I'll go ahead. The motion would be that we accept the position description that was used in hiring of David Guy. We believe in possession of that as one of the examples that were provided in the email, that we will move forward with a performance review based on the information that we also received, ranking various levels in the job description from poor to excellent. And then we would provide that information back to the chair, which is myself. I will then formulate all of the, put everything together and formulate a letter or information that we would review with the executive director and provide any additional recommendations for any increases or any changes. The timing of that would be that I would receive the information by the next board meeting, and then we would have further discussion in an executive session at that time. So I move that we follow that guideline that I just provided, and that would be my motion.
I second the
Clear
motion.
enough? Thank you. Do I have a second?
I was the second.
Yeah,
Oh, sorry, I'm the motion. Sorry. Thank you. Do we have everyone in favor say aye?
Aye.
Aye.
One opposed? All right, so that's adopted. Thank you. All right. Back to the agenda. Thank you for all that hard work. The new business would be terms for Behavioral Analyst Advisory Committee members. I think David Fye has some information about that.
Yes. So as we talked about a little bit earlier, the advisory committee policy says that advisory committee members serve 2-year terms and can be reappointed up to 4 times. So you can serve a maximum number of years in the advisory committee of 8 years. And I mentioned earlier that we were going to be identifying individuals who are coming up on their terms to be reappointed. One item I just wanted to make you aware of, it doesn't really require any board member approval, but it's a unique situation. And so instead of just acting on it, I wanted to make sure that you were aware of this too. The Behavior Analyst Advisory Committee has been unique. It really didn't meet for several years after 2018, but it started meeting again in 2021. There was a meeting in the fall, and then another meeting was held in February. That advisory committee, from what I have been able to see in the records, started meeting back in September of 2015. And in the fall of 15, there were a few different meetings. The committee didn't meet in 17 or 16. So it met in 15, it met in 18, and met in 21 and 22. However, if you look at the language in the advisory committee policy, it says basically that you're able to serve no more than 8 years. So if the clock starts in 2015, then those members that were originally starting to serve in 2015 would reach their maximum years of service next year in 2023. As I mentioned, it's a little unique because the advisory committee didn't have meetings in each of those years. But as I understand it, when those terms started in 15, if the clock runs for an 8-year period, that would mean that they would all come due in 2023. Now, the advisory committee did add new members in the fall. So there are 4 new members, but in next year, they would have to add some additional new members and possibly some members this year, because there are quite a few that would have to come off next year based on that. There's really not a lot of guidance in terms of determining years other than just start time to end time. But since this was going to be a unique situation, I just wanted to make you aware of that. If you wanted to have discussions, I thought I would just give you the opportunity to do that, but I didn't want to move forward with that without having brought this up as a topic for you to be aware of and to allow you the opportunity to provide input if you would like to do so.
So I think, David, there's 9 total on that committee, advisory committee.
Yeah.
Bruce, do you have any comments? Yeah, thank you. Sorry.
If you look at, and this has to do with the non-board members on the advisory committee. So, board members are a little bit different, but the advisory committee policy talks to the number of individuals on the advisory committee that are not board members. And so it says, no less than 3, no more than 10. And then it talks about the terms that people can serve on the advisory committees. So yeah, I just wanted to bring this to your attention. So,
and it would drop to 4 in 2023, correct? Is that
correct? At the end of June in 2023, those I believe the 5 members that started in 15, they would essentially reach their 8 years of service, and so they would come off. And so since it was kind of a unique situation, I wanted to bring it to the attention of the board to make you aware of it.
Well, and I wanted to be clear that, when we are following the board governance and we approved everything, that there are other advisory committee members that have had to, I don't want to say be removed, but, their term ended. So this is a real interesting situation we find ourselves in. But if we move forward following our own guidelines, then like you said, about 5 of those members would drop off, and then there would be 5 new members that would be appointed.
And also too, they don't have to be at that 9 number. So there is a range from 3 to 10. So it could be fewer members, but yeah.
I would recommend that, I know David's going through a lot of stuff here. It's the kind of thing that makes my eyes glaze over. And once we get this all figured out, if we could commit that to some type of a spreadsheet and then put that in the safe and no one mess with it, so we can always refer back to it and don't have to go through this process again.
Yeah, and I've actually created an Excel document. It's sort of a master list, and it shows when each of the terms end. So I can go ahead and provide that to the board maybe at the next meeting. I had identified those all for every other advisory committee, but the behavior analyst one with this unique issue, I'd kind of highlighted them, and I wanted to discuss it with you before making sure that was the decision to go forward with. So
I think that's what we're doing, is we're just correcting so many different things that I think this is just one more thing that will improve, and then it shouldn't happen in the years ahead. So
I guess my input is just to go ahead and be consistent. We got a couple, we've got a year or so to kind of figure out what the impact's going to be on the functioning of that committee. It's not like it's next month, so.
Okay. So then we'll move on to the next topic unless there's other comments. So board approved trainings for clinical supervisors. Deb, I think that would be you.
Yep, this is me. So I asked for this agenda item to be on the board agenda just to have a discussion about, I guess, what other people's experience are with figuring out where these board approved trainings are. So we're already having workforce issues, of course. We have current staff who are very, wanting to get their clinical license, and we are very much wanting to support that for a lot of reasons, but, also for employee retention, right? So then with the particular 2 disciplines that require this board approved clinical training, so for the professional counselors, definitely, I mean, we don't have a ton of folks that are LCPCs here. So the onus is on them to become board approved trainers. So, we can help out these folks. So, I have one of those folks, and as he went about trying to figure out where to go, he ran into a lot of dead ends. So I started trying to assist him, and it just, I don't know, it just doesn't feel very good. We've created this requirement. We can't publicize or do much of anything except very informal, well, you might try here kind of stuff. I don't know. I don't know that there's a solution. Through a coworker, I found potentially some other links, but that just doesn't seem like the best way to go about this, because anyone else kind of on their own, or well, the board gave me the same suggestions I already tried, and if what I mean, if we weren't in a big agency, that he might not have ever found in these other options. So I don't know, I'll just let it be open for discussion. Like I said, I don't expect this to be something easily remedied, but I'd love to be wrong.
I'll step in here, Deb, because I think, for me, this is one of those things where when we start out making recommendations, sometimes we don't know the implications long term. And it's a challenge for MFTs unless you're going to do the national approved supervisor training. And so it's sort of people are doing what you're talking about, which is the piecemealing. And, we experience the same thing with our professional counselors. They can't find that. What is the list, like 82 people or something? I heard that there's a maybe it's not even that much. But there's just such a limited pool. It would be, I think, advantageous if we could kind of use this provider CEU as a mechanism to call out to people and say, hey, this might be an area of interest, submit some content for board approval. I mean, we just need more resources for sure.
I hadn't even thought about connecting those two. I like that.
We had that issue with MFTs, and I called Mary. And it was a really significant process to get somebody approved through all that. But I was struck as I read through that survey by the social workers about the number of people who responded about having not very favorable supervision. But what it made me think was, that's the problem, as Mary said, every time you regulate something, then you create this cascading set of problems, as opposed to having a supervisory training available that isn't profession specific. And then people, when they were looking for a supervisor, could say, have training in this. And instead of going the other way, where we're mandating something, and then there isn't this content out there, or it's really difficult to get, and it's profession specific. I would like a more broader kind of approach. I certainly think training and being a supervisor would be a useful thing. It has created a lot of problems, and particularly in the area where I live, where people are really spread apart and often, looking for profession specific supervision that may be occurring by somebody on the other side of the state who doesn't really understand where they're practicing or how they're practicing. It has created some unique challenges in its own.
I know that our national board provides a very good training, but I'm not certain that all professions do have that option. So.
One thing I've always been concerned about, especially on CRC, is not only the definition of an approved supervisor, but what is supervision per se, because there's all sorts of different ideas out there about it. One is you're an instructor. You're teaching them stuff that in my mind they should have learned in graduate school. Other people say, well, it's a supervisor, sharpening skills and making sure they know how to apply what they learned in school. And other people tell me that it's a therapeutic process, which, CRC, we try to make a difference between that, but I'm not sure that always happens. So I was wondering, as we approach this, if we could find or come up with our own definition. What is supervision and what would we expect, an uncertified, unlicensed person to experience in supervision? Is it an instructor based? Is it therapeutic, or is it just looking at certain skills and having the supervisor focus on those skills and then rate how well the person does on that?
Seems like it's a little bit of everything, really. And I think that the intimate relationship does allow for what seems to be therapeutic, but if you have any pre-existing vulnerabilities, which many supervisors do, and so, well, we do, and it's not that we shouldn't, but not everybody's aware of when they're being triggered and how that can be, can interfere with the process. So I think it involves a more sophisticated, more clinical-based knowledge overall that is not given in school at all. Except there's probably one or two universities that have a class in supervision, and it's like, bravo. But no, not. So we end up just kind of learning how to do that on our own, but based on what didn't happen or what good did happen, we fumble through that process ourselves. So I think the extra training sure is nice, and there's nothing that would stop anyone from getting that, So.
Well, and that's where I think, our profession, the AAMFT, has a very prescriptive and intense supervision training program. And so again, it goes, that's not what everyone wants, that's above and beyond. And our goal originally was to protect the profession, to make sure that we have people who are knowledgeable providing supervision to people who need it, and that didn't intend barriers and stumbling blocks. And so it does feel like, because we created the regulation around it in the statute, that we should also do something about it to improve access and broaden access.
So that leads me to the question I have. What would it look like for the BSRB to have a board approved training program? So I'm curious to hear from Dave or Leslie or Cindy. What would that look like? Is that something that we could potentially do?
Just my 2 cents. I think that it would require board members to do the training because it has to be done by professionals. Mm-hmm. And I know we can't charge for it. Those are the 2 things I know.
I guess I just want to say just one more thing. I would like for us to revisit as a board the intention behind that requirement. And I can't disagree with anything that's been said so far, right? But I also recall very specific discussions in this board some time ago about, well, that supervisor didn't even know this requirement exists. I mean, how many times have we had that, right? About the ratios and things like that. So unless I'm dreadfully wrong, I mean, when we go to national trainings we're not teaching them that still, right? So there's still a disconnect from some of the things that I think drove the reason for this from what's actually happening. But I was always in favor of something more general, and that's why I could never really get behind it for addiction counseling. There are offerings out there for clinical supervision for addiction counseling, but of course they're not going to go into the requirements of Kansas specific either. So I would like for us to just be sure that whatever problem we were attempting to solve, and it's probably not even some of the same board members, that we're actually missing, hitting that mark. And do we need to look at some sort of changes for an upcoming session?
Some of the stuff you're talking about, psychology tried that years ago and they've given up on it. but I think it had a good idea. They had, along with your triple EP, whatever it is, licensing exam, they had what they call a jurisprudence exam, which is a written open book exam written by each licensing board, state by state. And what they do is they just ask a whole bunch of questions, you know, like the ratios you mentioned, Deb, and is it okay to have sex with your patient? If not, you know, or is it when, you know, and all this and that. And it was an open book test. So they couldn't argue over, you know, who graded it or not, but it more or less assured that everyone would have delved into that kind of intimidating, unprofessional conduct part we have in our statutes right now. They don't like to read that.
When again, when it comes to ethics, that should be taught in an MSW well, it is really interwoven in every class, to my knowledge, but its supervision is different. It's you know, it's a very different role that students are not taught about, you know, so. And I think there can be harm, you know, in that process if the supervisor is not trained appropriately, or I don't know. I know the CRC will see supervisor, supervisee, you know, conflicts that occur here and there. And a lot of it has to do with the supervisor not knowing, you know, basic information about hours required, supervision hours required. So, you know, even though they sign all that on the training plan, it's not certain if they really know as much about the regulations and statutes as they claim they do. And that's not everybody, I'm just a small percentage, I'm sure.
Good discussion. It's something definitely to keep track of. So I guess we'll keep talking about it. So thank you for that. All right. The next thing is executive director serving on committees. David?
Yes. So I've tried to do my best to really understand a lot of the work that's being done by the different national associations. For example, SIPAC, ASWB, ASPPB, for example. And as I'm interacting more with individuals at the national level, I was recently asked if I would be willing to serve on a committee for one of the associations. SIPAC has an elections committee to assist essentially the work of the SIPAC commission. And I would never want to accept anything that would take too much time away from my primary focus of working for the board. But, you know, in terms of reviewing those types of offers or requests from the different associations, I was not sure how the board would feel about me accepting positions to serve on those types of committees. So I wanted to just have a short conversation with the board and let them know I was offered that opportunity, and to ask if the board would have any objection to me serving on any of those types of committees for the national associations. I'm still reviewing this opportunity. I'm not sure that this is the right one for me at this time, but if this is something that you would like to weigh in on, or if this is something that you would like me to take those types of offers to you, I'd be happy to do that, but I just kind of wanted to get a little direction from you before moving forward and accepting anything like that.
I think it's great that you would be on committees with other organizations and such. I hate the use of this word, but Kansas does not want to be a silo and just function here by ourselves and not be aware of what's going on in other places. So I think that'd be very, very useful. As far as approving individual committees that you may or may not join, I think I feel comfortable letting that up to your discretion, you know, because it will take away from your time as executive director, and you can, you know, monitor that and make sure that doesn't happen.
I agree completely, Bruce. I think that we can certainly trust you with latitude to make those decisions on your own, David, about what to participate in and not without coming to us for permission. My 2 cents.
Agreed.
I agree. Trust your whatever decision.
And when we were going over this for the agenda, I also said to David that, you know, he's going to, it's his responsibility and it's part of being the executive director and knowing that we trust his decisions, that I want him to feel like he can make those decisions without having to bring it to us. And I know that's important for you, David, as well. So as much as I appreciate it being brought, I think that we also trust what committees and what you're doing with, you know, with the BSRB. So feel free to move about and do what you need to do, because it only, I think, makes it where the board looks even better when you're out there and your face is out there. So I appreciate that.
Okay. Well, thank you. I appreciate that direction. I do think it's valuable. I've been working to try to set up sort of a network of individuals from other states, and I think that's going to be a really good resource going forward. But as I get more involved with these different groups, I think there are going to be other opportunities to serve. So before I went ahead and did that, I just wanted to get some direction from you. So I appreciate that. So.
Okay, thank you.
You can be our poster child for mental health at all these other places.
And addictions and social work and all of the above, right?
But I do like the macro meso. You know, I think it's important to get involved at all levels if you have the time to do that. I mean, it all works out pretty good.
I agree. Okay, the next thing then on new business was the board meeting format. I think we kind of talked about adding that 10-minute break. Is there a need for possibly, we had a lot on the agenda and we somehow were able to streamline it a little bit, but I don't know if since I don't know if we're going back to face or not, but since we're still on Zoom or on the live stream, are we thinking that we want to start earlier at 9 o'clock again, or are we okay with the 10 o'clock? Do we need another break included? It's really hard to determine if the format needs to change based on the level of information that's coming through that we need to cover in each board meeting. It just seems like it's growing and growing. And I know it's, you know, during the legislative session, I'm sure it's going to be a little bit more possibly, but I just wanted to get your input from you all, from the board.
As I recall, we started at 10 o'clock meeting time in what had been 9 o'clock. And for those of us that come from the frontier part of Kansas and Wichita, that means you're getting up at the crack of dawn and hitting the highway pretty early. So it was out of consideration of that, it changed to 10. If we go to face-to-face meetings, and we've, you know, up the virtual ones to 9 a.m., I'd like for the face-to-face to revert to 10.
I agree, Bruce. And it would be great if we could move this, as long as we're on this format, 9 to noon. I think that would work out really well. And I do appreciate a scheduled break. Seems like 1 is fine, but that I did appreciate that today. It's nice to get up and stretch.
Thank you.
And it's nice to have, I like the 9 to noon, except for when we meet again, person to person, because it is like, I usually am pretty routine on like breakfast, noon. And if I don't eat during this meeting, I go right into another meeting without any kind of food. And it really, talking about self-care and, you know, just trying to take care of ourselves. It's really nice.
And I was
eating live stream
experiencing the
either.
same thing. Sorry, what did you say?
I was just saying no one wants to eat while they're being live streamed.
I know.
Hard enough to take drinks of water. Yeah.
So I have a question about Lainey's availability, because I think I remember something in the past about this.
No, as far as meetings, Jane's on here now. I think Jane has a board that's on the same schedule as you all, but I don't. I'm fine. 9, 10 doesn't.
Good.
And it may have been that Jan had a different board where there was
Yeah, it seems like there was a conflict to start earlier, so we're good.
Nope, I'm good.
I like the plan to move to 9 a.m. for virtual.
with the 10-minute break in there somewhere in between. Okay. Thank you all. I don't think we need to have a motion for that, correct? We can just agree to that. Okay, thank you. Okay, so the next is preview of topics for the next board meeting, discussion of impaired provider programs. And Jane, we have her on the call. Are you?
Yeah, I can go ahead and start this
Oh, okay,
conversation.
go ahead, Dave. Sure.
Sure. And because in the past, we've done old business and then new business. And I realize that sometimes we put a lot of relatively new topics under new business. And so, and kind of doing some agenda planning with Leslie Seawester, we wanted to go ahead and add this to give you all a heads up of something to look into so that you could come into the next board meeting to have a little bit more discussion on some of these topics. The first one is the discussion of impaired provider programs. So that's not really a discussion topic for this meeting, but for the next meeting, we hope to have a little bit of a conversation about that. And just as a little bit of background, so there are some other agencies in Kansas, and then there are other agencies in other states that use a program that's referred to, it has a number of different names, but essentially it's a program when you have providers who have issues with addiction, and they run into, in some cases, they run into disciplinary issues. Certain programs are set up to assist those practitioners in stepping away from practicing and receiving treatment and care. In some states, they use it as something of an alternative to certain disciplinary punishments or some things that you might get as an alternative. You either can, have this level of infraction, or you could submit yourself to the impaired provider program. But as I mentioned briefly at the very beginning, there are different names for this type of program for states, and there's also different ways that these types of programs work in different states. And so Jane and I had a little bit of discussion about these types of programs, and she would be a good person to talk to the board maybe in the future about these types of programs. If she wanted to add anything today, that would be fine, but she and I have both heard some information on these types of programs at national conferences.
Oh, David is
And
frozen.
so I think it
There
is
he
something in the future. Sorry,
You were frozen for a minute.
Okay. I do think this topic is worth the board reviewing and discussing in the future. And if Jane wanted to add anything today, I want to go ahead and open it up and allow her to add anything just as a early discussion topic.
I wanted to add something too. You said addiction, and I think we want to also add that it could also be mental health.
Absolutely.
So it's not just, and Jane is shaking her head. So yeah,
Mhm.
I'm a little bit familiar with these programs. So.
And I'd like to add another comment too. I think that a lot of supervisors or clinical, a lot of people are referred to what's called a remediation supervision process. That's very, very, very different than regular supervision. And there's a lot of information out on that type. And that covers a broad range of impairments. And usually is recommended after a violation has been substantiated. So some special training on how to do that. It's very different.
And this is Jane. I was just going to say that it's just a matter that we've been having the occasional complaint come in. The statutes do, for all of the professions, do say that if the individual was impaired at the time that they were providing the therapy and the services, then do know, for the rest of the board to realize that we are having those complaints, and they are substantiated on individuals that are impaired at the time of services. But we also are seeing our fair share of individuals who are overworked, and they are having some burnout. And with what I did at the Board of Healing Arts was oversee individuals who would be, and the term we just used was monitored by some of the impaired provider programs in Kansas. So that's and I brought it to the Complaint Review Committee's attention to just for consideration on some of the aspects. And that's what I would like to at least prepare something a little bit more formal to discuss with the board for considerations. Also, David and I, when we were down in Fort Worth, I don't think Lainey stopped by because there wasn't any fancy gizmos they were giving away. But there was another, what I am familiar with too, there's a service, it's called the Ethics and Boundaries Assessment Service, EBOS is what I am familiar with it. And the Board of Healing Arts used it a lot. I have used it with the Board of Veterinary Medicine, and I think it would be something to consider also. And I think David picked up some of the flyers on that too, but that would be something for the board to consider too as another avenue to explore for these individuals. This is a course that they would have to complete, and it does go to boundaries and ethical considerations and stuff. It's not cheap, but it is effective and has been found to, even with my veterinarians, it was kind of, it did become a good tool to use. But so we will put something together. It's just a matter that with all my, with what I did at the Board of Healing Arts and then what I was doing with some of the other professionally licensed boards, I just would like to have something to propose to the board for their consideration.
Mhm. Yeah, so today is just more or less an introductory, just brief discussion on this topic, just to make you aware. These are some of the things that we've been learning about from national meetings, and there are similar programs that are used by other agencies. And so feel free to research these types of things, and then maybe at the next board meeting or a future board meeting, we can have a little bit more of an in-depth discussion on that topic.
Okay. The next is approach to telehealth standards.
Yeah, and I can talk just briefly about this one. So I mentioned that there was that bill that was introduced this session that would have created a committee to provide guidance on telehealth type issues. And I don't know that bill is actually going to move forward this session, but I do think between some of the recommendations from that legislative special committee on mental health modernization, and I think between that bill being discussed, I think that, you know, with the prevalence of telehealth during the pandemic, and I believe it will continue after the pandemic is all, you know, wrapped up. I think now is the time for the board to start thinking about having, as much as possible, sort of a unified guidance on telehealth standards, or at least having those discussions. I know there was a subcommittee in the past that focused on this topic, but I think there's been a renewed push to kind of go ahead and start looking at these topics. And so maybe something for the board to discuss at a future meeting in terms of how to handle that. And as I mentioned earlier, the advisory committees are looking at the unprofessional conduct regulations. So maybe those discussions will also assist the work of the board when we're looking at the topic of telehealth standards.
Thank you. And then delegation of statutory duties.
Yeah, so this is this is going to be a big project, I think. So I've been continuing to review a lot of the statutes and regulations for the BSRB, and in looking at that bill that would ask us to do a comprehensive review of all the regulations, there are roughly about 120 different regulations, not individual items, but like, you know, the big topic for each of the 7 professions. So there's about 120 sections, and within that there are lots of different items. And then you take all of the statutes for the professions and for the board itself. And one thing that I have noticed is frequently, you know, the way that these were all drafted is it talks about a number of decisions and a number of duties, and it says the board will do X, Y, Z. For example, in the statutes about the board, it says the board will hire an executive director, but it also says the board will hire clerical staff as necessary. Well, that has been delegated to the executive director to take care of personnel matters. What I think is probably necessary for the agency is for us to do a review of our statutes and regulations and really make a list of all of the references to where it talks about the board, doing this or doing that, and really outlining which of these are reserved to the full board to make this decision, which of these have been delegated to the executive director, which of these have been delegated to another entity, for example, the complaint review committee. And then if there are items that are not currently being handled by the full board, prepare some delegation motions. These were done in the past over the years, but I think it's time to bring these back to the board to clarify who is delegated the authority to make these decisions on behalf of the board, or if these are still for the board. So this is not going to be a short process. There are lots of references to these in the statutes and regulations, but I think having a clean copy where we can point to each of these will be really helpful moving forward. So I wanted to let you know that is something that I'll be working on, and I might bring this to you in sections because I think it'll take a long time to do a big report of all of it, but I think it's necessary for just kind of a continuation of the cleanup processes for the agency.
Thank you. All right, are there any questions or anything for David? All right, so we have reached the end of our meeting. So is there a motion for adjournment?
I move that we adjourn today's meeting.
Thank you. Second?
I'll second.
Thank you. All in favor, say aye.
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 Anyone opposed? Same sign. Okay,
Everyone have a
Thank you.
happy Pi Day.
thank you.
Thank you. Have
Thanks,
a-
everyone. Take care.
Thank you for all your hard work.
Thanks.
Thanks, David.